So yeah,
We're ready now.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Julie Carr. If you don't know me, I think you all do pretty much. So thanks for coming. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Jen and Judd, and then they'll do their thing. I also just want to emphasize that what they're going to be presenting here is kind of a shadow of what they're going to be presenting at Counterpath in Denver on Saturday. So 7 p.m., we would love to see you there. If you have any questions about that, you can ask me, but you could also just look up counterpathpress.org. Jen Scappettone, who I went to grad school with, and always admired and was terrified of for many years, so I finally got over it and then we became friends. She's just the smartest person I know. She works at the juncture of scholarly research, translation, and the literary arts on the page and off. She's the author of the books Killing the Moonlight, Modernism in Venice, and then From Dame Quickly, Poems, and The Republic of Exit 43, Outtakes and Scores from an Archaeology and Pop-Up Opera of the Corporate Dump. That is all one title. Her most recent publication is Smokepenny Lyrichord Heavenbred 2 Acts, which is an e-chapbook from the Elephants, hailing from a libretto composed for live mixed reality performance with writer and code artist Judd Morrissey, and also artist-technologist Abraham of Nissan. So other new work can also be found in Asymptote, Boston Review, eFlux, Movo, Argomenti, and in the catalog for the U.S. Pavilion of the 2018 Venice Architecture Biennale. And Jen has won many fellowships and residencies. Right now, she is a fellow at the Stanford Humanities Center. Judd Morrissey is a writer and code artist who creates poetic systems across a range of platforms, incorporating electronic writing, internet art, live performance, and augmented reality. He's the creator of digital literary works, including The Procession, an 80-foot-long internet art performance poem, The Last Performance, and The Jew's Daughter, a very famous piece you've probably all seen in your classes. Also, My Name is Captain, and he's a recipient of Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant, a Fulbright Scholars Award in Digital Culture, and the Mellon Foundation Collaborative Fellowship for Arts and Practice and Scholarship. And Judd is an associate. I forgot to mention that Jennifer teaches at the University of Chicago, and Judd is an associate professor at the School of Art Institute of Chicago in Art and Technology Studies. Thank you. I'm excited to hear from you.
I want to begin by thanking all of you. Thank you, Julie, Michael, Jason, Mark, Lori, all of you who I don't know, Alice, for being here, and Jen, for being here with us, for being here with me in this place that we occupy together, this room, this building, this stadium, this city, this world, this universe, this place comprised of us and what takes place between us, generated and regenerated from our ideas, our experiments, our mistakes, our conditions, our processes, our bodies, our language, our art, and our technology. In this short excerpt of a lecture, I will navigate new territories of writing that arise at a complex intersection of language, code, bodies, and technologies that capture and transform space, exploring a poetics of place as placement, displacement, and replacement, of place as it takes place, and as what is taking our place when we disappear into the perfectly circular void created by automated processes. This is a specific kind of place, a house hovering within itself as a spectral presence comprised of data. The house is 6018 North, a 108 years old dilapidated mansion run as an art space in Chicago by curator Tricia Van Eck. It is September 30th, 2017. And therefore a somewhat recent example within my practice and our practice of a poetics of embodied mixed reality. And I'm noting that embodiment here, through the substitution of a glyph, contains an idea of its own negation. The presumed solidity of body is interrupted to signal an absence that might also be an openness, an in-betweenness, a queer liminality. The house is supposedly haunted, and is itself a stable but porous body with holes in the floors and walls and copper remnants of a defunct household communication system that we activate throughout our performance. We named the event Savageness, or There Are Veins Embraced in the Property, a title comprised of a code and the phrase that it signifies in the New General and Mining Telegraph Codebook from 1895. My collaborators are poet and translator Jennifer Scappettone and poet and programmer Abraham Avneson. Last summer, or maybe it was now 2 summers ago, I don't know, some summer, in summer, we meticulously scanned the entire house, except for the basement, using a LiDAR scanner, a device that uses pulsed laser light to create high-resolution 3D representations of the physical world. We captured the house as a massive point cloud containing billions of data points that we see here displayed at approximately 20% of 10% of its entirety, making for a semi-transparent, ghostly double of a room that is itself the naked frame of a room that has since been brought up to code with the addition of sterile white walls. The scans of the house are interwoven with LiDAR captures of an underground copper mine that we scanned the summer before. The layering of house and mine is partly an accident based on an invitation to create the work for 6018 North and the Chicago Architecture Biennale. But it makes possible a poetics that combines mining with channeling the dead. It also reveals that the house, with its layering of 20th and 21st century electrical and telecommunication structures, could not exist as a modern house without the natural resources and human labors of the mining industry. A critical analysis would doubtless destroy the appearance of solidity, this house, stripping it of its concrete walls and uncovering streams of energy, water, gas, television signals, a complex of mobilities, an active body cut in Henri Lefebvre. I skipped a part. Here we perform with pennies and a metal detector. When we traveled to Michigan's Upper Peninsula in the summer of 2016, we scanned 3 spaces: the shaft house, hoist house, and one underground level of the actual copper mine, as a sort of media archaeology project, exploring the connections between the mining of copper and its use in telegraphy and modern and contemporary telecommunications infrastructure. Studying the Michigan Tech archives, we became aware of the labor strike of 1913, an instance in which the electric telegraph, powered by mined copper, is used as a tool for covert communications in the stealth suppression of an agitated workforce. Exploring the poetics of mining, we commissioned the creation of a rope and pulley system for the embodied performance of responsive 2D and 3D augmented reality mobile apps. Krang on, As We Go Down. We ended the performance, an intensively assembled, cited iteration of our work, by enacting the channeling of a poem comprised of telegraph codes that we translated in real time using a code book. It ended with the word Krangon, code for as we go down. Savageness, or there are veins embraced in the property, 2017. But what happens when this language and embodied research takes place not in a house, but in a monastery, as it did when we performed for the Electronic Literature Organization in Porto, Portugal, adapting the work to acknowledge a different context and set of architectural constraints, and designating the iteration with another name?
Practically, of strikers. There is no destruction of property. Subjugation standards heavy, privately rough, misapplication was the latency in figures using vertical, thereby giving us chance to comparison, spy, state troops.
Requiem, how many tons can you haul in 24 hours? Lament. The mind has been opened up well. This collaborative thread of practice began with a year-long residency at the Gray Center for Arts and Inquiry in Hyde Park, beginning in fall 2016, and supported by a Mellon Collaborative Fellowship for Arts Practice and Scholarship. The Data That We Breathe, a creative laboratory and cross-institutional course exploring the poetics and politics of breath and air, led us to our inquiry into the interconnected history of copper mining and telegraphy and the epic Midwest labor strike of 1913. In an odd twist of fate, the rural working class of America's Rust Belt rioted again, electing our current president against all odds and expectations, in a dangerously misdirected plea to be remembered by those in power. We presented the work, which now seemed to convey an entirely different set of meanings, in the traumatic aftermath of that event on November 10th, 2016.
Strikers, Smokepenny Lyrichord Heavenbred. Last year, by constant penetration, encroaching on the reserve. Inside, it's raining heavy metals. Oh,
sight hole have had to do without. The LiDAR scanner, short for light detection and ranging, swallows up whole landscapes with its rotating laser eye, producing massive point clouds of visual data, but it is unable to capture information in the immediate vicinity of its precise location. This creates a hole, a circular void in the center of the data. For this reason, if one wants to disappear, they can simply place themselves beneath the tripod of the device. Cranesbill, the vein goes down. Crangon, as we go down. As I navigate this space, I read from an invisible landscape of text situated in relation to scaffolding, water, clouds, and an interactive rose tattoo on the naked chest of my shivering collaborator. When I read the word buoy, in homage to Alan Turing, who wanted the letter U to sink under its own weight, and for the word to transform into an embodiment of his desire, I am looking at an actual buoy and a buoy in Lake Michigan. I look down and see these words in the sand, a satellite view of the corpus. To undertake this talk is to take the text position, lying down, font face up, supine. I offer my body of work for self-dissection, to be excavated within its own locus of operations, those performative processes that stage between space, language, code, and bodies, a sense of place taking place. We are now in another house, a scaffolding open to the elements. Abstersive, above the water level. As it happens, this performance is also curated for the Chicago Architecture Biennial in 2015. The Performance and Technology Collective Anatomical Theaters of Mixed Reality, or ATOM-R, which I co-founded and co-direct with performance artist and choreographer Mark Jeffrey, were invited to remap our then in-progress work, Chell Theory, to the outlines of a sculptural house created by the artist Sarah Fitzsimmons. These images were from ATOM-R and House, 2015. Absterging, above the datum level. Place taking place. Poetics of embodied place. Mixed place. Embodied reality. Poetics taking place. I am reading a text that I planted in the environment. Not this one, visible on the screen. This title that has become inseparable from its place, but the text against the real clouds. It is a somewhat evolved version of my first attempt at a geospatial augmented reality poem, a text that is distributed in space and takes on the visual textures of satellite imagery. The poem is An Empty House. This was actually its original title. House also in the sense of theater, etymologically a place of seeing. A house like Gordon Matta Clark's, split and sawn open to let in the scattered light of an event where nothing takes place but place. Except perhaps his patience at the center of the zero. Except perhaps driftwood of a shipwreck. Except perhaps this constellation or assemblage, a nearly closed circuit of sand, wood, and bodies, interrupted by a cut. Very strange. Try it one more time. It's like a bad dream with technology. Huh. The certificate of this server is, this is so interesting. I'll tell you all about it. Let me see if it's still up. This is so interesting. I won't tell you how sad this is. Okay. Well, when I published this book, I was using this system called LAR, which is an augmented reality. It was an augmented reality third-party system, and I had these images in the book. And you would scan them, and then you'd have this poem. And then, like a month or so, the company went under. So all of that stuff stopped working. So I switched it out for this QR code. And then all of this was working like an hour ago. But what I think has happened is their servers are now dead, gone forever, probably. So maybe this piece, we just witnessed the death of a piece. Unless we lost our connection, but I don't think that's what happened. Is that possible?
End of a piece that's in the end of my book, too.
See, Wi-Fi is kind of weird sometimes.
No.
Yeah, no, I think it's gone dead.
I would check a list.
That's really, we'll see what happens tomorrow, you know? Maybe it'll come back.
Telephone the powerhouse that the main wires are insulate. Then with your tongue remove the tape. Gene tumor, her lips are copper wire. One possible capsule genealogy of the tangling project we're presenting today is embedded within this beyond confessional artifact. The lyre of which I will speak striking in the form of a mother's snapshot of Field Day 1984 at South Grove Elementary School, exhumed at random last New Year's Day and transmitting an awkward testament of bygone northeastern blight into the bare clarity of a Chicago frigid, flat, Trump-ruled, yet Pritzker bedecked. One clue to our current Midwestern landscape's refinement by way of starchitecture prizes, galleries of impressionism, military museums, children's zoos, and schools of medicine and of law happen to reside in the semi-defunct industrial infrastructure hovering over that submissive race of the 1980s. This stage set had seemed to pertain only to those unfortunate enough to inhabit the expressway exit crook of the town, offering up little other than gruel for dread and for flight. Yet it was being unencrypted by fits and starts of poetic research at the moment of the photo's recovery, which is to say, by jerks of studied haphazardous rage and re-yoking of eclipsed facts into smothered sentences. The following was not undertaken as an academic project, as I surely would have been unequipped for the histories of engineering, telecommunications, environmental regulation, labor struggles, corporate personhood, and kickback diplomacy into which it ensnared me as author externality, but is instead the result of the inappropriate application of skills attained through completion of a humanities degree toward a decade of search string storm by nauseating storm, vortex of dead or merely frayed ends. Research in this funnel feels unnervingly like backing one's way from a working mother finally broken by oncology into perception of infrastructure as puncture, tearing a knowledge duct to connect the vignette of kids competing against each other in the playing fields, to the lucrative network of copper wire and cable subtending a molting system so vast it notoriously challenges visualization. One can hypothesize the mother's psychic edit, cropping from their unseemly backdrop the children of fellow, more or less recent immigrants from South and East Asia, Europe, and the Caribbean who had sought housing on the affordable brink of a school district on Long Island's Gold Coast of public education. Yet towering over Whitman's scored grasses on this day when classes are suspended so that all can celebrate the great American traditions of sports and health are garbage trucks and the water tower of a defunct copper mill tapping the Mogothi aquifer that had produced the wire for clients like the World Trade Center, and that had for decades, alongside companies like Grumman Aerospace, Hooker Chemical, and the Konica Corporation that enabled generation of the photo itself, dumped tens of thousands of tons of toxic sludge into an unlined adjoining dump, while depositing sludges of zinc, copper, lead, and nickel into on-site lagoons. The arrow points to my family home. The EPA had placed the dump on the Superfund program's national priorities list at the beginning of that school year, while the Zero Wire complex was classified as an inactive hazardous waste site. Though the neighborhood was ignorant of this, and no teacher brought it up until the kid in the photo center started pushing facts in the form of disassembled lyrics about it into the public a couple of decades later. The neighborhood wasn't aware either that the copper company had been acquired on the cheap by a family of Chicago millionaires during the 1970s in a deal so lucrative it made headlines, nor that the company's name was changed as the new regulatory bodies identified its adverse impacts, nor that the troublesome property was swiftly flipped. Nor did we know that the hazardous waste site was only cleaned up in 1994, or that a decade later, destruction of mill ruins in the service of a would-be luxe condo and cottage home development revealed the presence of sump spills of petroleum hydrocarbons. This is the new urbanist plan for that live-work development, and the satellite image of what it would be planned upon. So the details show the elementary school, my block, and the great park and luxe condo suites, which would be directly above the dump and the former wastewater discharge basins. Given the continuing presence of sanitation trucks, we didn't even realize that the sump had been closed in 1973 because elevated levels of heavy metals were detected in the public drinking water. Nor did I know when I graduated college equipped with information about a vast range of far-flung stressors that the dump across the street, of whose toxicity I was still unaware, had not been capped. Fast forward to return from graduate school, having unlearned my ABCs, facing once again the vague ugliness behind the relay races. Weekends, I was rediscovering the material foundations of the ExxonMobil masterpiece theater of yore while living over the Greenpoint oil spill and trying to support my mother through chemotherapy. The water tower had just been pulled down. You can see it in this photo at the top. Sole apprehensible artifact of the milling next door, deleted from awareness. Administration of Mom's decidedly non-therapeutic chemical brew made me curious about what had gone on under the missing tower's watch. I had been raised with these opaque letters branding the sky over our kitchen sink. A Spanish word that hovered over the flat, unsponsored expanse, inscrutable, a clue. It took mere minutes at the browser to realize that whatever had happened assumed more than monumental proportions. I decided to make poetry figure it out. It may seem ludicrous to deploy poetry as drill into such a problem, yet this was my intuition because I had no authorized story or sources, nothing even to look at and describe. So much economic gain had depended upon a general nebulousness glazed with distractible screens astride the white management. By piecemeal passes aimed at rubbernecking the sublime, verses could plunge into the muck of sites from which history and actuality had withheld a sentence, punching portals through which to hunt and virtually transduce conduit by conduit the mutinous directions muck takes when it's not being managed or tracked. It was mere language from the web to Walmart that enabled me to follow the wire and its extrapolation in a hallucinated yet literal lyre further. Through trial and much error, I stuck together the search terms that would unearth Ciro Wire and Cable's corporate reports digitized by the Cleveland Public Library. In boastful internal documents aimed at gaining investor confidence, I burrowed into the origins of our mill's copper. Promotional fare cleared the way toward comprehending a legacy of damage that exceeded the neighborhood, nation, continent, and the book, whose culpability is still being dodged at Ciro's origin in name, though under another corporate flag. The copper mining at Cerro de Pasco in the Peruvian Andes made syndicate founders J.P. Morgan, Henry Clay Frick, the Vanderbilts, and Phoebe Hearst super rich. With open pit blasting operations commencing in the 1950s, the town vaunts massive bulges to show as a continuum of noxious spiral between one brand and another. Mining builds alternative mountains of arsenic and lead-laced mining tailings that hem in neighborhoods, inhaled. Extraction bores a gash that develops and cannibalizes this city, leading to diseases of the stomach and lungs, developmental disabilities, and malnutrition in the local population. Copper smelting produces sulfur dioxide emissions and acid rain in nearby La Oroya, identified in 2006 as one of the world's 10 most toxic sites. Our neighborhood hazardous waste site therefore had distinguished tentacles in the center of global capital, while being entangled in a dark history of exploitation transgressing national borders. This research led the grappler to more fault lines in the network, the salvaging of copper at the e-waste dump of Agbogbolushi, Ghana, making for a lethal postscript, as wires are burned to strip away the insulating tape for the copper beneath as quickly as possible, often by kids. We don't often anticipate the way that our worlds implicate by default hundreds of thousands of people beyond us, the way in which a banal image of a race strategized by the educational system to tout individual achievement might embed as ambient the overweening story of global migration, global telecommunications, and transnational capital. But by pressing upon the unsightly phenomena that those in proximity are prone to edit out as a coping mechanism, and that those in post-Fordist power prune away as real estate ruse, it becomes clear that the bodies of communities like the one in that snapshot are the unsung monuments of telecommunications and its collateral damage. And that beyond their kinship with immediate neighbors in compromised water and air, they possess other kinds of kin, fathered by power brokers, familiar to them only through their own cultivation in art collections, libraries, and museums of anthropology. Since the networks of mineral extraction, smelting and refinement, milling, and salvage are resolutely transnational, as are the campaigns to obscure these collectivities in service of a focus on individual striving. Kinship not only of complicity but of resistance can be sought out through the rabbit hole channels of inquiry as well. Rooting out a tractate on the outrages already committed by the Cerro Corporation by 1913, finding contemporaries fighting to name breathing as battle, point touristic gazes to mining tailings, and fight civic myths of opulence with ungreenable aftermath. How to write one's way toward these buried solidarities, pasting, screwing disencumbered bits of evidence in uncanny chains, groping for infrastructural mouthpieces, alternative media of inspiration, in conviction that extrapolating from the most domestic of scales to the most sublime is a critical part of exposing material disorders that determine the clouding of the wireless age's reputed democracy of knowledge. Now more than ever aware of teeming archives of exacted ignorance, I seek to live up to the possibility of poetry as a knowledge-producing apparatus. Can we imagine a poetics as publicly useful and dissident as that of Diego Rivera's Detroit murals, which draw us across production lines of the auto industry and expose their overweening genealogy in Great Lakes hematite for iron and Great Lakes fossils for coal and petroleum? A poetics whose tethering lines are as informative, torquing, and accusatory as those of Frida Kahlo's Henry Ford Hospital, Detroit, a communist ex voto painted in oil on sheet metal, which sets Detroit's smokestacks and water towers against their illustrious architect benefactor Ford, whose name in turn brands the scene of the artist's own botched abortion and her subsequent miscarriage. A critical geopoetics, by which I mean an affectively soiled, gunk-mired investigation of smothered facts, could open up pathways for a cognitive sprawl that stalks the harm subtending latter-day fertility. These restored routes of pennied calculation, juxtaposed in chorus, can compete with the etherealized imagination of late capitalist social life, one that carves out lyric solace in the midst of depression and bust through fantasies of pennies from heaven, while subduing awareness of the infrastructure, the instrumentation that made them possible. In this land and escape, social belonging manifests in the sludge, gas migration, and water contamination that are leached away from the high-flying boundaries and rhetoric of political constructs, yet which remain staunchly tethered to generation of the communicative instruments of the so-called global village. Through a wired imagination to manifest the monuments to sociocultural belonging behind walls, below our skin, underground, striking the innumerable layers of copper that make up the grid of power, we might create disharmonies that stalk the system and its off-grid collateral damage. Smokepenny Lyrichord Heavenbred occupies ever more disposable technologies in counter-futurist fashion to expose their veins in and into real-world environments, focusing on the conductive foundation of modern telecommunications networks anxiously being supplanted by fiber optics. These acts sound the implications of exploiting one of many chemicals charging our devices. They translate their depths into shudderings of air. These soundings attend our manufactured, LiDAR-scanned, and augmentedly real hallucination of ghosted technologies and currency to express the material fallout of such apparently ethereal phenomena as the cloud sensuously. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from nether?
Immovable property is actually a two-faceted machine analogous to an active body. Savageness. There are veins embraced in the property.
Tomorrow or next year, this is your death, a Christian.
Every time it rains.
Beastly bath bricks.
Blasting bonanzas have been struck.
Strike! Don't you know each cloud contains?
Denonymous bellitude.
Escape, don't consider business safe. Every time it rains, show barrel.
Draconic air drills.
A well-known and most respectable firm will not pay in advance.
Don't you know each stoke contains
Strike. Gripe penny brokerage.
Liberty to act as banks think proper.
One-man widowmakers. Strike.
Air drills, soliloquies.
Gangs of
Shuddering. Copper wire.
undesirables. Show barrel. Smokepenny Lyrichord Heavenbred. Last year,
by constant penetration.
encroaching on the reserve.
Every time it rains,
Strike! Jaw rope lynch law.
News quite correct, pending the hearing of the case.
Don't you know?
Each gouge contains
Strike! Boom and bust of nitro lungs. Don't you know each crowd contains asphyxial,
umbrageous,
even song, Scappettone. Memorandum of Association
shall require a hoisting
of
engine,
5,300 horsepower.
pennyweight, hellhound,
Hope soon to be making lyricisms, hue hall melody, strike.
market in a downward tendency, now presents a better appearance.
You'll find your fortune falling all over town. Subjugationers,
Disobey it, have
strikers,
not yet fallen.
strike. Be sure that your
Unshowered,
is
uprising downpour. Be sure that your
6% profit,
save them for a
pack horse,
of
sunstroke,
and
flowerage.
save them for a sale of 23,250 orders
If you
will be
want
assured
the
and
things you
influenced by
love
telegraph
match.
at once.
Show
Show it
battle,
all. Unless you can get patents
bathing.
by blasting,
You must have showers. Strike! Outspoken,
Rise. The
backfaller,
battery returns.
noise in the wires. So when you hear it and thunder,
Showing traces of gold.
strike! Bath metal,
Much blasting is needed.
disorderly,
Stocks continue falling.
show battle. Don't run under a tree. There'll be a one-man drill, our agitator, dropping a dick and a
Din in the odious machine.
strike for you and me.
Yada yada kastati kastati.
每当下雨，雨是收益的白木集。知不知道北斗云寒流？
Shauri waya. Unajua kila moja wingu.
Chaque fois qu'il pleut,
Every time it rains. Every time it rains.
Cada vez que llueve en la altura y hay ganancias en la planta.
Every time it rains, it rains.
Curtail the output. Cover all emergencies.
下雨和保的是收益的白木。
Connessione.
Every time it rains, profit is what?
Every day I try to describe soul. Maybe you can hum the bars of
Filtração. Propôs fiação.
Παρατήρηση υποφελία. Προτινόμενη κανονίωση.
Profited witnessing.
Don't you know each crowd contains down?
Don't you know each cloud contains
Profited witnessing.
Siempre que llueve.
Astro Chronos when
每一次下雨，就为了下雨沾白。
No, each cloud contains choke. Down chain cable. Curtail the output. Cover the period.
Every time.
Every tonight it rains, it rains.
Chaque fois qu'il pleut,
Every time it rains, prompted white mưa lệnh nhuận làm trắng đề xuất dây đồng
Ce n'est net que longtemps.
il pleut témoignage proposé. Vous savez bien, chaque nuage contient cordes en chaîne, mouille étrange, couper le courant.
Aprovechado puesto cambiado
Pourquoi está custom net on a can?
Ogni volta che piove
mỗi khi trời mưa lệnh bạn làm trắng dây đồng cậu không biết là mỗi đám mây có khí mỏ dây chuyền cắt
Chaque fois qu'il pleut, il pleut. Chaque fois qu'il pleut, il pleut. Témoignage
¿Acaso no sabes que cada nube contiene?
Chaque fois qu'il pleut, témoignage
very much for listening. So that's all I know. I have CDs available for free to a good home. There's a few out there. Please take some or all, and there's stickers as well. And I'd be glad to answer any questions if anybody has any questions about this.
Super generous. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wouldn't mind for another song.
I'm sorry? You do?
More?
More? Okay, if anybody wants, I can play for a short piece. A short piece?
Yeah.
Let me, you know what, let me set a different template here. Real quick. That's it. All right. Let's see what I can. Thank you. Let's see what I can do. You know what? Hold on, I've lost my signal. Let's see what's going on. Where is my... Here we go. Okay. Much better now. Never work with computers. Or guitars.